I too will be telling a story about my father this evening. And I will admit that this story is a bit heavy, but it's important, and it's after all this time that I realized it was a gift. And also I want to acknowledge that in these COVID times, there are some families that don't have the privilege of me of going through what I went through and how it was a gift. My relationship with my father was a bit distant throughout my life. My parents divorced when I was 5, and my mom had custody of my sister and I, and we moved to Pennsylvania. So that created some geographic as well as emotional distance from my father. You know, this wasn't terrible. Both my parents got remarried. I got a lot of bonus family in those transactions. But, you know, it kept some distance between my father and I. My sister, my mom, and my stepfamily lived in Pennsylvania. My dad and my stepmom lived in North Carolina. So every summer, my sister and I would go down and visit my dad in North Carolina. My story starts in the summer of 2014. My husband and I were trying to downsize from a big house, getting ready to move to our apartment here in Lancaster. At the same time, we were trying to help my son prepare to move to Philadelphia. So there was a lot going on. In June of that year, my dad had a heart attack. He seemed to recover pretty quickly. He was only in the hospital a few days and came home a few days later. And then in July, he had, you know, another health crisis. He was going into kidney failure. But he fought it like he fought the COPD diagnosis and the esophageal cancer diagnosis that he had gotten a few years before. He fought it, he kept going. Then he ended up in ICU. He was struggling to breathe. His lungs were paper thin. He needed a feeding tube. And then they eventually put him on a ventilator. But he kept fighting. He kept going. He was going to try to keep going. Over the next 6 or 8 weeks, my sister and I would travel to North Carolina every other weekend and spend time with my dad and my stepmom. So we'd go into the ICU room, visit with my dad, and I became obsessed with that monitor that displays the vital signs, you know, the blood pressure and the heartbeat and the pulse ox number. And I was trying to get my head wrapped around, like, what should these numbers be? I was just obsessed with watching my father breathe and obsessed with those numbers. So my sister and I, you know, we did this traveling, and then it was coming time for us to travel again, but my dad wasn't getting better. He wasn't getting worse. So we decided that we were going to hold off traveling for that weekend and go the following weekend. So that Monday, my stepmom called late Monday evening and said, Daddy's made a decision. He's done fighting. You need to come as soon as you can. Needless to say, Eric and I hopped in the car 4 a.m. the next morning, drove to North Carolina. We got to the hospital about 11 a.m. We went to visit my dad in the ICU. We said our goodbyes. The ICU staff, medical professionals that are like angels on earth, as you can well imagine, actually sent us out of the room so that they could take Daddy off the ventilator and give him some medicine so that his breathing wouldn't be labored. And when we were in the waiting room, my stepmom looked at my sister and I and said, look, I've already said goodbye to your dad. He wants you there to be with him. He wants you there. Of course, Eric and I said, of course we can do that. So when we went back into the room, the doctor was there and said, look, we're not sure if this is going to be 3 minutes, 3 hours, or 3 days. So just be prepared for that. So my sister and I each took our places. I was on one side of the bed holding one hand. She was on the other side of the bed holding his other hand. And I looked up at the monitor and they had turned off the display. They had turned off the beeping. I had no more numbers to be obsessed with, or so I thought. In an effort to keep myself awake, I sat silently with my head on the cold bed rail and I counted to myself, inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. My dad's 4-count breathing went on for a long time. I lost track of time, actually. And eventually, his breaths went to 8-count. 8-count inhalation, 8-count exhalation. And then I realized I was counting 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. My sister heard a difference in Daddy's breathing at the same time, and we looked up at one another across the bed from one another, and I just shook my head. I silently shook my head. We knew it was happening. We both turned and amazingly at the same time watched the color drain from his face, and we knew he was gone. But we also knew that this happened the way he wanted. He was in control and he was at peace. So I am, again, while this story is a bit heavy, I feel it was a big gift to be there to support my father. I felt brave, truly brave. And I feel like it was a gift that my sister and I could give to my dad and my stepmom. But mostly I felt relief for my dad because he no longer had to struggle to breathe and he was pain-free. And I was just very happy to be there to help him transition to that place of peace and light. Thank you very much.